We're back. We're talking about what is valuable in the world. One thing that I wanted to talk about is we've discussed data at many points. This idea of like having multiple data points, specifically when you can containerize it. I think in like a given like you have a control variable that is like for us like the ICP who we serve, which is going to be a marketing leader, depending on the stage of company, like a director, VP, CMO. Depends, but like a lot of them have the same problems, and like we can triangulate a lot of those same pain points, which is back to the point of these documents in front of us. Like we've done the research here, but one thing that we had talked about, David, again, this question that you asked in a couple podcasts ago, which is if you assume that everything you can automate will be automated, and then not just you, but everybody else is going to automate all the same stuff. Like let's say we've got AI agents doing keyword research, internal linking, CTA mapping, anything that can be automated will be automated. So what's the unique value? What's the unique value that you serve the market? And what's the unique value that you extract from that, right? And we talked largely about trust and credibility as a new form of scarcity, or as I put it in the newsletter, new gold. Poetically. It takes a lot of courage to live as a poet now. You know that?
Field notes are poems.
In an age that's so prosaic,
it works.
Proprietary data is the second. What? I think I'm going to talk banalities in here. Let's get a little floral. Proprietary data is the second bucket that I came to. And in the essay, like basically what I had talked about in the new gold what may play out trend-wise with AI. And not just AI, but like a lot of the trends that we're seeing in the marketplace for, let's say, information discovery, brand discovery, how brands go to market, specifically through more of an inbound kind of like, we're not really talking about paid, but the three trends really that I think are uncontroversial are there's going to be a reduced barrier to entry. So a democratization of the ability to create content. Mm-hmm. And there's a ton of different like corollaries and caveats that I put into that. Some of that's going to be good. You may see a rise in quality, and you may see more people who should have been writing content but didn't have the time or ability. You may hear more of their voices, and you may also just see a lot more noise. And there's like supply and demand, and like when demand is constrained, such as with attention, naturally we only have so much attention we can pay. And supply raises, like, there's a dilution in the value of that, right? The second thing was that I believe that it's going to raise the median bar of quality and essentially wash away everything below the median. Because if, LLMs are essentially trained on 80% of the internet, right? Like it's going to take the median value in terms of predictive next token. I think it's sort of uncontroversial then that's like better than like, just by definition, it's like 50 percentile, right? And then the last one would be that there's going to be a sort of reduction in friction or an increased accessibility of information. So it's way easier to get answers now, right? You don't really have to even sift through links, and like you just get a summary in Perplexity, and you get a quick answer. And you can actually, this is so cool, you can ask it to explain like your five or put it into jiu-jitsu metaphors. And I do that all the time with certain things that I'm trying to learn. I'm like, teach it to me like this. Use my language, But the question was, if all of those things play out, then what is the scarce value that we're investing in? And trust is one. The next one is like proprietary data. So let's explore. What does that mean?
Proprietary data?
Yeah. Why is data valuable from like a content perspective, from an SEO perspective? We're obviously doing quite a bit of original research with clients. We've agreed that this is valuable, doing our own original research. And then I'll add a point later, which is that I actually think that like if we're all using AirOps and whatnot, if we have better proprietary data that we can train that on, then that's actually a unique advantage. But that's a little more technical, I think.
Yeah. I think before answering your question on why data is the most valuable, like an analogy I've been using a lot amongst our group is like, I've been reading this book called Unreasonable Hospitality, written by Will, I forgot, Guidar or something. I should know this, but he's like the general manager of 11 Madison Park, the person who got it to like get multiple Michelin stars. And he talks about things in terms of hospitality of like, there's the black and white stuff that you have to get right, the table stakes, and then there's the color that you add. And in restaurants, it's getting the right dish to the right table at the right time. And then the color is around the actual human touch and experience around how do you make this a memorable experience? A memorable restaurant experience is not getting the right dish on time. It's the stuff around all that. And when I think of automations and AI and all that, I think it can help with making sure that you get the black and white right, and make sure that you are optimizing your content for the right keywords, using the right phrases, or making sure your content briefs are good, and helps you with grammar and editing and a lot of and like composition. But it's not going to add the color of unique opinions or even original data that you wouldn't otherwise get. It's literally just trained on what already exists. And I think when you bring up why data, or like that's sort of the new gold for all this, it's because it's going to be a scarce thing. Like you've already been talking about that. Like it is so hard to go get original information and data and put in effort. And so there's this kind of like this cost signaling of, I put in the time and effort to go get this information that doesn't already exist or is not already easily accessible. So therefore, you should probably trust me more than someone who might just be summarizing what they're finding online through easily accessible.
Yeah, it has to be mined. It has to be like manually withdrawn and pulled out of the experts who don't have time to write about it, right? Like you have to go find that and sit down, and maybe over time you train a model on some of those learnings, and then it becomes a little bit more aligned with the trust signals in the affinity that you're creating. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you use that analogy in your newsletter, the mining of it all. Like it doesn't just appear for you. You have to go like dig it out and pull it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where it gets a little bit like technical and nuanced, because data now is a lot broader than it used to be. It's not tabular anymore. It doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't necessarily have to be as clean, right? Like, so for instance, like I built a workflow. Let's talk about like kind of the table stakes in SEO, right? Like if we're doing middle of the funnel content on how to do something, or I had one on like content operations, and like we're going to distribute that through search. It's going to be the primary channel is going to be for search. So what you can do is you can actually do a SERP analysis and figure out what the question, that the query is like kind of the intent. You can figure all of that out through like unstructured data analysis, and SERP analysis is now automatable. You can pull that into a content brief. You can take the content brief and extract questions that you would ask a subject matter expert to back into those answers that somebody's looking for. And then that's the portion where you can collect that information. And when you say mining, that's the fascinating part, is like now, so unstructured data is now this amazing resource, but you don't have to necessarily go like I interviewed you guys, or like I had you record, little 30-minute videos, but we have a podcast with 200 plus episodes. Like that may exist in those too. So like all of these sources of information that you may have been collecting through, let's say gong calls, right? Like gong calls are now this probably amazing source of data. But you can now structure that in this pool. And if you build a workflow, you can extract that into a workflow that would say format that into a LinkedIn post that's designed to be engaging, to have a hook and to have the right image, right? And you can even create the image with some sort of an AI prompt. For search, it's like it needs to have this section, and this section, and needs to be formatted in this specific way. And then the unique data, which is subject matter expert insights, it could be literal data too. It could be something like, here's benchmarks on like average bounce rates across like landing pages in different industries. Like it could be quant data as well, but that's like the value out of the portion. And it's like how you collect that is, there's so many methodologies.
I think at risk of taking this in a different direction too, one thing that I don't think we've talked about a lot is, we've talked about it in the past, but what's not going to get automated away is taste. And that's not really something you can teach. But I think it's also going to be really important how you explain these concepts, or how you decide to frame what you're talking about, where there's only so many ways that content operations has perhaps been talked about, but maybe there's a unique way that you can talk about that and frame it to make it more easily understandable, or provide better examples of how to do it well. And I can't become an example of how you might do that, but that's an opportunity for someone to come into this industry and look for a unique way to describe things and like have some taste. Maybe it's visual, or maybe it's just a different format, but LLMs again are just going to do what's already been done, rather than trying to bring a new angle to things.
That median quality,
I have this may like totally digress us, but like I have a contention on taste. People are talking about this all the time, and I've been trying to write a newsletter, but I maybe I don't have the taste to do it on a meta level. But you hear all these marketing influencers now talk about how taste is like the last thing that's really like valuable, and they're like, you must, develop a sense of taste.
Oh
and, like,
no, am I one of those?
No, you haven't done it as much, but like, do you know how hard that is to even define? I saw some marketing influencer on LinkedIn say he had a whole post about like taste and how it's like the ultimate, it's the definer of success nowadays. And one of our mutual friends in the comments was like, yeah, but like how have you actually seen somebody go from like no taste in a certain area to developing taste in any reasonable time frame? Because I haven't, right? It's sort of like, it's a little like a je ne sais quoi, like it's a little intangible of a quality. It's like, why do you have taste in like how you dress? And I don't have like the best taste in terms of like my interior design, but I've got like really rich taste in terms of the music and the literature that I read, right? And it's not something that I like consciously set out. It was something that I loved so much and consumed so much and like wrote so much that eventually I like things that other people don't like. And it's not like taste is not like the ability to dictate or to predict what the market wants. It's really like a discernment as to like what you want, and sometimes there's a calibration between the market and what you want, but it's really like an internal intrinsic thing. And that's why I think like some of these marketing influencers, they tactify everything. They make everything like this really tangible tactical layer. But I think taste is actually, I would prefer to leave it in the realm of the romantic.
Yeah. At risk of sounding silly. So one thing that I'll just even use an example you just brought up with, you have taste in different areas in your life. I think the impression I get of a lot of folks posting content on LinkedIn is that's kind of all they're thinking about and all they talk about. And it's a lot of the same jargon over and over again. But when you start making analogies to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, to me, that's a form of like taste and creativity where you're bringing in a new angle to things. Maybe it's not what people want to hear or have things explained to them, but it's different. And to me, that's one of the unique things. Like I'm sure LLMs probably could explain marketing concepts using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu analogies.
Probably better than I can.
But how many marketers are going to go ask an LLM to do that?
Well, the ability to like to decide that that's like the way you wanted to frame it, which is where prompt engineering comes in. And that's this idea that like if you're a great like question asker, if you're really good at honing in on the right question or the right framing of a query, a prompt is such an interesting thing now. It's like this interface with like a, like engineering technology. It's like through verbal language. So it's like being more articulate in specifying what exactly you want to get out of it. That's like this new emergent skill, even like avoiding any like unique data or subject matter expert insights, like being able to, we talked about it on that pod that we did together, being the conductor that knows exactly how you want the violins to sound and not just say like, louder, faster, or like this really crude, vulgar, terminology and vocabulary. So I don't know if that's taste per se. I think that's like a level of like resolution in terms of like the vocabulary that you have around your vision, right? So maybe it's vision that I think maybe people can develop more of a sense of, but I think taste is obviously important, but it's one of those things I really think it's like reserved for like a very small portion of people or companies, and the rest are probably better set on deciding to be useful, to decide that I want to be the highest utility resource. And because like Apple has taste, or like used to have taste, that was like their defining nature, is like Steve Jobs was like the ultimate like taste maker, right? And then there were all these other companies, like Uber is an example of like a data-driven culture. And Keith Rabois, is that how you say his name?
Keith
Rabois talked about that in the All In podcast. And I think he talked about how Apple is kind of like in this conundrum because they don't have the same taste, but they also don't have the data culture, right? So I think it's really hard to be a brand that is like top 0.1 percentile in taste.
You said something earlier about like interior design versus music and literature. Of like, I've loved that so much for so long. I think taste is one way that experience and like passion manifests, especially in like your Field Notes newsletter. The way you call back to like miscellaneous quotes from books that you've been reading, or, the analogies to things that you're an expert in, that comes not only with experience in the topic you're writing about, but experience in other things, right? Like outside of marketing, outside of business. And I think that makes not only your newsletters very interesting and engaging, but makes them tasteful. Like it doesn't, they're not dry and they're not just like, oh yeah, okay, so here's 3 trends that will emerge. And here are like how to have value. Like you don't just like listing this how you would like an SEO post or something. Like you're connecting it to like mining gold. And like that to me is taste, is like how experience and passion manifests, and then ultimately wanting to be useful, but doing so in like a more creative way.
But I just think ultimately, like you can't have like a linear path, and like like if I wanted to be more analytical or data driven, like I could take course A, course B, and course C, and I could have like a learning path that gets me to that point. And I think like in this context of developing taste, like I at no point was structured, and at no point was teleological in my pursuit of developing that taste. I in fact meandered throughout like decades, and all of that kind of converges together in this weirdness. And I don't like when people are dictating this like as marketing influencers to say you should develop taste. I don't think that computes for me.
That's not what I'm saying. I don't think it should be a goal.
If you have it, do it. You know?
Yes, I think the fact that you're not trying is why it's manifesting.
Yeah,
frankly.
Or maybe it's like, you know, find that thing for you. Maybe that's the tactical takeaway. Like if that, like I don't know. I feel like Sam has like much more taste than I do in terms of like aesthetic design. Like when we were doing our magazine, you do too. I mean, like you've got more of an aesthetic sense. Like when we're putting like slide decks together, but both of you do than I. You know? So, but I avoid that part because I'm like, the only thing that I can do in that arena is A, be data driven, and B, converge to best practices. And like that actually is very valuable for me to do. I should not probably try to be like a tastemaker in that arena because I am going to miss the mark.
Yeah.
And taste can't compensate for not knowing what you're talking about.
Taste can also be this like very artistic form of expression that actually doesn't have business value too.
Right.
Yeah. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about because, I mean, thank you for your compliment about I'll call it design taste. I used to spend so much time Googling and looking up different like I enjoy looking at designs. I look at magazines simply for understanding layouts because that's just how my brain works and I get a lot of joy out of that stuff. And as we talk about taste and creativity and things like that, we've talked about this trend before where it feels like marketers have become a little too reliant on data and wanting to always make the right decisions or not make a mistake, essentially. And I think, especially with LLMs and needing to try new things that aren't, and like testing hypotheses and building taste, I think there's a lot more of a need to do more of those things that don't have, honestly, logical or rational, like rationale behind to do this thing. It can't be like, oh, I heard this, therefore I'm going to do that. Sometimes it's just, this is interesting to me for some reason, or this is calling like my name and I want to try this thing out and I have this belief that it will work for whatever reason. Let's try it out. It might not work. It might fail. Like one of my favorite quotes from Seth Godin is like, this might not work. Should probably be something you say every now and then. You shouldn't be playing it safe and just trying to do the thing that you believe like you always have 100% certainty will work. And I think if we bring it back to taste, it's like a winding road. Like you try things, you're like, oh, this outfit didn't work, or this painting technique or whatever I just tried didn't work, but I want to try this other thing now. And like you sort of develop that over time. Feels like in marketing, there's less of a playground to do that, to develop a taste and get that pattern recognition, at least, especially if you just have that one job where you're doing marketing. Like that's not really a great playground to try new things.
It sounds a little risky.
Yeah.
A little scary.
Yeah. Very
Venture
scary.
out on the ledge and do
very
something
scary.
different that might not work.
Let me just do what everyone else is doing.
But it is like ironic in a way because you hear a lot of like complaints on LinkedIn and like in the general marketing zeitgeist about how we're not allowed to be creative or there's too many constraints, there's too much pressure. And maybe that is true, but I actually have not heard that from leaders. I actually hear over and over again that they want to do more interesting, like more bold initiatives. So I don't know if that's like a chicken and egg problem, if like there are constraints and like incentive structures at companies that disallow maybe the, you know, boots on the ground like ICs from doing that stuff, or if there's sort of a, what's the phrase, like a glass ceiling or it's like there's like a artificial like
restriction,
what you actually,
restriction.
like a self-imposed, like maybe you actually do have the like free reign to do that. And it's just like the learned helplessness, like there's been so many years where it was so best practice oriented that you just don't know how to fly,
I remember we had a conversation like this a while ago on the podcast, maybe 2 years ago. And the consensus that we all came to was, if you're doing the job that you were hired for and prioritizing and generating the results that you were hired for, that's how you buy yourself the space to take these risks. And I think a lot of people either don't know how to do the first thing, or they get so caught up in perfecting the first thing, or leadership, maybe funded leadership, just really hones in on the first thing and doesn't create a lot of space. But I don't think it's as much the latter as it is the former too, which is that learned helplessness. Or they get so used to the dopamine hits from the results that they get that they're not willing to take that risk of like, I'm going to do this creative program. Don't know how to measure success here, but it's calling to me. It's something I want to try. Maybe I'll fail at it, but they carve out that 20%, the risky side of things. But it does you have to prove yourself in your role. You have to do that first 80%, generate those results. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, you got to make money to earn the right to waste money, and then paradoxically, you got to waste money to make money. In some sense, like it's the costly signaling. It's the billboard that's hard to. It's actually very easy to measure the efficacy of a billboard, by the way.
Yeah,
it's like a geolocated experiment, but that aside, you have to have like years of like client acquisition through pretty boring sales and bottom of the funnel SEO to earn the right, even as founders who technically can do what we want, to make a magazine that like is a little bit more of a risk. It's not like we're going to do that day one and just go bankrupt. It'd be a foolish decision. And like every company I've ever been at, except for the ones when I was earlier in my career, because then I was a little bit more bold and audacious and would come out of the gates with like the craziest ideas. But as soon as I learned, like you do the things that like earn you the right to build the trust. And then later on, when the time is ripe, then you pitch the bigger initiatives. When I was at Workato, the first things I did were like fix broken analytics and landing pages and, raise a CTA above the fold and things that I knew just pattern recognition wise would like increase conversion rates, and like that those little wins would buy me a little momentum. And then, 9 months in, I'm like, let's do predictive targeting, let's do dynamic like personalization. And that's like not something I would have pitched right out of the gate because it's expensive, it's complex, and it's uncertain. But we've kind of moved into the brand territory, right? Which is the third arm of the new gold.
Affinity,
yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things like I find the term brand to be too connotatively loaded. It's one of those things that everybody has a certain definition for and nobody agrees upon. I always looked at it as just this gestalt, like a sort of like convergence of every touch point, customer service through sales, through marketing, some of which you control, most of which you don't. And it's like this, I look at it as kind of like a offhand, like rule of thumb, a heuristic, that you associate a brand with this idea in your mind. And then there's some component of like quantitative value, which is like brand awareness. How many people are aware of your brand in surveys, if it's like aided recall, if you say like, which of these 5 CRMs do you know, or unaided, where it's like name 5 CRMs and, Salesforce and HubSpot come up. So there's some quant component where it's like, what is your saturation in a market? But then there's this really murky, way more fun category, which is like, how do you feel about the brand? Why is HubSpot's color orange? And like, they're a little bit more quirky and fun. And Salesforce has got like blue, and they're like they're the risk averse version. They're a little more technical. Like, what is that? That's a function of their product decisions, but it's also a function of many messaging and marketing decisions. So, but the broader point is that like as information overload occurs, saturation occurs. This is the point we started with, which is like everybody's kind of saying the same thing. There's a lot of noise out there. What's a heuristic that helps you make faster decisions? The affinity, the brand. I mean, that associates with the person, but also the company, right? So that's got to be clearly like important nowadays. Any thoughts?
I'm coming up blank. I remember I wrote at HubSpot the ultimate guide to brand awareness. It's probably still on page 1. I remember how fleeting that concept felt to me, but it's still like it resonated. I was like, yes, I know what this is, but to unpack it across 8,000 words was really difficult. And I remember kind of creating a scoring system based on a couple different things like brand affinity, brand awareness, brand trust, which I think you could probably pull all those into one concept. But ultimately, I've found that it became more important to have a really strong brand when there was a lot, like when you were operating in a really crowded space.
Mm-hmm.
I think that goes for both B2C and B2B. And I wonder now how important it is as B2B brands kind of verge on the more casual type of marketing, like a little bit more relatable, like moving into like meme territory, or seeing some folks in the SaaS space do ski trips instead of conferences. Like I wonder how those echo back to the brand and how people kind of place it in their mind, and if it's contributing much to the bottom line in the long run. It's like, maybe I'm not in the market to buy this product, but the team seems cool, the content's good. How might this ladder up to an excellent product? Like if they care so much about their marketing, maybe they care about their product and their UX, and maybe it's worth doing a demo. Like I wonder what that path is to looking at like, this is cool and this is memorable and fun, and how that equates to the business results. Like what is the long game there?
Are you skeptical about that, or do you believe that there is like a bridgeway between those two? Between like the cool factor and the actual business results? I
think there is a connection if the branding activities actually resonate with the person doing the tire kicking and the buying.
So saturation of your market and your ICP, like there has to be like the targeting.
But yes, you have to like deeply understand who's tire kicking or who's going to be interacting with my brand the most. What, like, where do they spend their time? What appeals to them? Like kind of getting into like, how do they spend their time on the internet? Even what do they find funny? I don't know where you can get that data, but getting really into the minds of like, who's doing the research to pull together a consideration set? And then how do I appeal to the decision maker, or the signature on the contract? If that all connects and makes sense, then I think that they can be connected. But also I've seen some brands just do funny shit. Like, I'm just so curious how HubSpot sponsoring the National Football Championship. Do you remember that a couple years ago?
Mm-mm.
Was it the Super Bowl?
No, they do advertise in NFL games, though. I've seen their ads. I think that
they had like a bunch of people in like orange jumpsuits with like HUB. Like I think it was the National Football, like the college football championship. That to me didn't make sense because I don't know. I don't even know the demographics of who watches that. I'm sure it's people of all ages, of all job titles. That to me, that was not a line. Mm-hmm. But maybe they had good impact from that. So that to me seems like a branding activity that doesn't make sense. But I've seen brands. We've seen that ski trip of that one company we were talking about. I'm like, that seems to be appealing. Like that could resonate.
I feel like I'm such a like growth marketer that like I even if I want to be more creative, I'm always just like, but how does it relate to the business? Like there's always this part of my soul that's just like, all right, I think there's something here sometimes, but not all the time.
No, not all the time.
And with your remarks on the funny, like the meme stuff, I actually think that's like it's more of a trend, and like you actually see more brands moving that direction. And I think part of like the differentiation factor, it's in the word. It's like you've got to differentiate. Mm-hmm. So like if all like you've seen those like cringy things where like every social media, like every brand on social piles on, and they're like, "Hey, brother," like they're using the language of like kids, and like it's very much like that meme that's like, how do you do, fellow kids?
Yeah. They're trying to be like Duolingo and Wendy's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like those brands stood out because they were novel at the time, and I think they were kind of following their taste or their heart. But then when you pile on and it becomes a best practice, it's a convergence to like what everybody else is doing. So I think that's where to me, like the idea is really like summed up in costly signaling. It's like there has to be some like inherent irrational behavior behind it, or like there has to be something risky about it. And if memes are popular, it's by definition not risky.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like there has to be something that like zigs when others are zagging. to even have the level of like, this stands out,
right?
Let alone the connection between that standing out and that maybe like attention that you're getting, and then transitioning that into actual demand for your product, right? And that's a complex equation. That's like, who are you targeting, and like, is your audience at the Super Bowl, or like, is it like it's surely on LinkedIn or like whatever like social network. Like you can do targeting there, but it's like, is the attention that you're garnering, like, does that translate, and is it like actually standing out? Those are the questions that I have.
I mean, a perfect example is, I know for the last couple of years, I don't know if it's the case anymore, but when you ask people about B2B brands that stand out to them, Gong was always top of the list. And I think since then, a lot of brands have started trying to follow Gong's formula or whatever they're doing. And then they all just kind of sound the same now. Like Gong was very personable. They were funny or whatever. And when you fast forward to now where, let's say all their competitors are trying to sound the same as them, how does Gong now stand out? Like, does their voice need to change? If they're on a short list of 3 different companies, and if they didn't have like the same strong brand recognition, but everyone has this certain funny best friend type of tone, how do you then differentiate? It's by probably not having that same tone. And so it's kind of this weird thing where even for us, we started off with this belief that SEO and content should drive pipeline revenue, which I don't think people agreed with before. It was stood out before.
It was much more contrarian at the time.
Much more contrarian. And now a lot of people are saying that now. So it's not very differentiating. So even for us, that's a question of, what are we saying that's different, or how are we saying it that's different?
I think I tend to look at the Affinity stuff in more of a contained way, maybe more in like channel saturation. There's this concept of excess share of voice. So essentially, it's usually like remarked on for bigger brands who they're advised to like spend more on brand marketing than their competitors and earn excess share of voice. So more, I'm going to totally botch this definition, but you're spending so you have more awareness than your closest competitors. And I think if you look at like maybe the brand awareness plays that you've talked about, like Gong, and I think Clay is doing it really well right now in a different way than Gong. And that's important too. Gong, I believe, was much more centered on like their employee advocacy. It was a lot of their employees talking, like it was like they made all of them LinkedIn influencers. Whereas Clay, you don't hear as much from the Clay team. You hear much more from Clay agencies, Claygencies as they call them. And they're doing these really complex recipes, and they're showcasing like technical like operation setups. And I can't remember, like, Bruno was behind a lot of that. I got to talk to him, like how they actually incentivized that. I don't remember. I don't think it was paid. There was some sort of a win-win relationship that they had built there. Being like, I mean, naturally, like if you're an agency posting about that, you may get clients from it. And then Clay is obviously winning because they gain the brand recognition. But for a set period of time, all you saw if you were in go-to-market was a bunch of people talking about Clay. And you start to think, I got to check Clay out. And the domain that I know this best in is in SEO and the surround sound strategy, right? And just as a precursor, the surround sound strategy is you look at that surface area or that channel as like a single SERP, or like really the top 2 or 3 pages. And in traditional SEO, you're looking to rank your page for a keyword as high up as possible. But then you have these certain search queries that relate to or imply that somebody's in the discovery process for a product. They're in, consideration stage, and they're looking for a series of CRMs that they can put in a comparison table. And they're likely clicking on more than one of those links. And they're also likely going to Slack communities and their friends and like just compiling as much kind of social proof and like ubiquity of products as possible. But if you rank on page 1, position 1 for your website, that's great. You're in the conversation. If you're not there at all, you're not in the conversation. But you stack accumulating value the more times you're mentioned on more pages. So if you look at the top 20 search results, and you're mentioned in a review site, you're ranking for a product page, you're on like an affiliate list, all of a sudden, the person in the similar sense that, they see Clay everywhere on LinkedIn, they think, oh, wow, Omniscient is here and there and on every page. And they start to think, I got to check them out, right? Like they're at least in serious consideration, and I'll go look at their case studies or like whatever other information they have. And I look at that as like a very tangible way to think about brand awareness. That's one domain, that's SEO. you could do it with podcasts. You could get on like every podcast that your ICP listens to within a span of like 3 months. And then all of a sudden they think, oh, wow, Tim Ferriss is launching a new book. Tim Ferriss is launching, they hear it over and over again. And it just raises above this certain threshold, which this noise ecosystem, like there's so much out there, but you hear it like multiple times and it stacks up and you think, I got to check that out. So I think about it that way. I don't know.
Well, there's a stat, like you hear a brand 8 times and you remember it or something like that? More of like a B2C thing.
That might be true, yeah. I'm
like,
so skeptical about this claims.
Yeah.
Like you got to reach out 7 times, like sales touch points or something like that.
Just reps. Yeah. It's
It
definitely
is probably
reps.
true in some sense. And then I think there's probably like higher resonance touch points and lower resonance touch points.
Yeah.
So like if you're at a Super Bowl, like the HubSpot thing, like that's probably a low resonance touch point because like you're distracted by, Kendrick Lamar and John Batiste, like amazing national anthem, and then like the game itself, and maybe you had several beers, and like there's so much going on. Versus this is why I love surround sound, is because you're really like tackling in market, people for the specific thing you sell. So I think like you're naturally going to have like a higher resonance when you appear in those surface areas or those like customer journey pools. So like there's kind of a spectrum, I think, as well. Yeah.
So the right message to the right person at the right time, you say.
Marketing? Question mark?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to do some fun questions?
Let's do it.
Okay. So let's see here. Oh, I actually had some really interesting notes that I did bring up. Yeah. I had some more poetic stuff though. When we talk about marketers needing to measure something around MQLs. What's a marketing trend that you secretly hope disappears forever?
That you secretly hope disappears forever. I don't think I have anything I secretly wish disappears.
What do you hope disappears forever?
I really cringe at these software companies trying to have these like, I'm your best friend, I'm your cool best friend tone and voice.
Mm-hmm.
Like we kind of touched on it, but they need to sound super quirky, and they need to use a lot of sarcasm in their marketing and extra self-awareness in that marketing too. That I think is way overplayed now. And it doesn't resonate with me at all. And maybe that's just personal preference, but it's getting very annoying, to be completely honest. And I actually don't think it stands out because everyone's trying to do that. And like there was a LinkedIn post about it recently. I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I've been feeling, but someone took the time to analyze it and put it into words. And ever since then, I can't stop thinking about it even more. Like it's not just seeing and being annoyed, but also seeing it and being aware that other people are also aware and people are still doing it.
That trend has been going on for too long. There was a brief respite, but I remember reading a Reddit thread years ago on this exact question, which is like, what trend do you hope disappears? And somebody had coined the term chatty copy. And it was like when, especially for companies like banks or, fintech or something like that, where it's a little bit more serious. Like, when you fill out like a form and it's like, congratulations, you rock. Like, great job. And you're like, I just filled out a form to get like information about a 401k. Like, could we like tone it down a little bit? And I don't know like what companies are doing that nowadays, but like MailChimp was I mean, they did it in a cooler way, I think. And they're much more like a prosumer almost like model. But I don't know, you think like, do you want to hear like some chatty copy when you're logging to Gusto and like paying people? Like, not really.
To me, it's just like, get out of the way. Like, where's the button to get into the software? Like, it's just like covered in all of this copy that I really don't need. And I just go right to where I'm, log in.
That reminds me of mine. But what's the trend that you wish would go away? I
don't love LinkedIn in general. And I don't hope LinkedIn disappears. But the chatty copy thing reminded me of the one liner post that hit like this. And I'm like, I can't. Like, I just skim over those. Like, I don't care if they have substance. To me, it's just like trying to hack my attention. Maybe someone likes to skim them. But that to me, as more of like a personal marketing or a personal brand marketing trend, just I think is dead. Kind of the LinkedIn bro language. Yeah. Is that what it's called?
Broetry, people used to call it broetry. Yeah. We've forgotten, but that was the original epithet for it. I have two. One relates to both of y'all's, and I recalled this because you mentioned like, I just want to move this modal out of the way. And I really dislike, this is more of a product management thing, but I really dislike infantilization of users and how every single experience has to have some like tutorial and walkthrough.
Like next, and it like goes
and
to
I
everything.
always try to close it out. And then there's some that actually don't allow you to close it out. And I'm like, let me figure this out. Like I can figure, this is a really easy interface, or it should be. And if it's not, like you didn't do your job, you know, like
yes.
I somehow back in the day figured out how to do a VLOOKUP without Excel walking me through a tutorial teaching me how to do a VLOOKUP. You know, I somehow figured it out by myself. Yeah. I'm an adult. Let me do that.
Yeah.
Just this like constant, like childish, like just spoon feeding you every portion of it. You know, it's like,
yeah. Coming from product, I always hated those walkthrough tools. I'm like, if you need a walkthrough on what to click, you're building your product wrong. And I'm guilty. Like I've worked for companies where the product interface was not great. And I'm like, this probably does need a walkthrough because even I don't know how to use it at first glance. But I think it comes back to like, there's just more expectation that, hey, I should be able to use this thing without 13 different click throughs to understand what button to click.
It seems like there's two problems that comes from, which one is like your surface layer, like bandaging a problem when you should be solving the deeper one, which is like a user experience problem, right? You're applying some surface layer solution. But the other, I am doing a little inference here, but it seems like over reliance on the metrics you can measure too, which would be like activation rates of new users, new user activation rates. And it's like I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that's a good thing.
Stories on that. But yeah, go on.
But is it like the end all be all, you know, and I don't know. I think Andrew Chen had some essay on this, but like, are you solving for the lowest intent users by doing that? You know, like if you just let people figure it out, would you actually be like building for the people who want the product the most or can use it the best?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we didn't talk about this earlier, but I'll bring it up anyway at risk of bringing us down a rabbit hole. But my gripe with quote activated users or quote MQLs is the way that those things are defined and the way they are measured ended up leading to them being gamed. And so, for example, the way people defined MQLs was anyone filling out a damn form on a website, regardless of what the form was for, and calling it marketing qualified. And then all of a sudden sales is like, I'm getting all these MQLs, but none of them are ready to talk to me. Like, why are we calling them qualified? It's because there was some inflated definition. Similar for quote activated user. I've seen cases where literally the interface that highlights where to click and everything is the exact button you want someone to click to call them an activated user. And I'm like, that doesn't count because you're telling them to click this thing. It's not because they had any intent to do it. And so therefore, yeah, your quote activated user rate is up, but your retention is shit. Like they just clicked it because you told them to, but they never actually used the product a week later.
It's this inverse. It's the opposite of the way it should be. It's the ruler. It's the measurement dictating the thing you're trying to measure versus like it should be the other way around, which is like you're just using the ruler to measure the action, but like the action is being dictated by the measurement that you've chosen. And I wrote this down like for the MQL thing, which is Nassim Taleb. I don't think he coined this. I actually think this is like Greek mythology, but he wrote a book on his little aphorisms called the Procrustean bed. And it's this concept where the term comes from the Greek figure Procrustes, a robber who would force travelers to fit on his iron bed. And he would stretch the limbs of those who were too short and cut off the limbs of those who were too long, right? So it's like you're really trying to stretch the utility of what an MQL is to fit exactly the way that it would make you look best. And it's like, even if it doesn't approximate to business value, there's this need for certainty and control, and especially like when it relates to the traffic trap too, but you get on this treadmill where, you know, you're reporting to your boss and your boss's boss, and you do these waterfall charts where it's like going up and to the right, and as soon as it stops, you panic and you figure out like how to game that metric so it continues to go up and to the right, and that's the traffic trap, right? Like you go after more and more illusory terms and that don't actually matter. And with MQLs, like, can you write an ebook that's just like so ridiculously, you know, like entertaining that, you bring people in and technically they're an MQL and technically they downloaded the book, but like they're so far away from like ever entering your product discovery territory that it's like you just stretch the limbs out to fit the bed. Like you didn't actually do a meaningful business thing. You just changed the measurement,
And go ahead.
I was going to read what you wrote on here about MQLs. I think it's really funny.
What did I write?
What's wrong with MQLs anyway? An over-reliance on value extraction at every touch point, like within 2 seconds of approaching someone at a bar asking for their number. Give it time. And a number, MQL, doesn't mean you're dating SQL, let alone getting married.
Close one.
Close one.
And I guess you could pull in brand marketing, which is like all the work that you've done to, be a charismatic, well-dressed person, that like isn't defined as a creep the moment that you talk to somebody at a bar. But yeah, imagine like if you approach somebody like in a coffee shop or something like that, and like immediately you needed some like validation that like you were going in the right direction. So you're like, can I get a number? And they're like, what? You didn't even say your name.
Yeah.
Like, it's like you got to let it cook a little bit. And then like there's going to be a more meaningful touch point, which is like when you both naturally agree, like, hey, let's like hang out sometime. Then maybe you're getting into SQL or maybe MQL territory. I don't know exactly like where this analogy breaks down, but it does seem like we have to like critically measure like all these like early touch points. And that's why there's this cool thing that like Chris Walker had talked about, which is like the divergence of like the brand and the demand models. Because I think sometimes even this relates to what we were talking about with tofu, mofu, and bofu. It's like maybe like that model just breaks down and some of that tofu stuff isn't even tracked in the same attribution model as a whole. You know what I mean? Because it can't really be like you can't really extrapolate the same metrics. Like it's like a different. You're trying to do something differently.
Different purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. I have another. It's not really a trend, but like it's one pet peeve that I've noticed recently, which is I wrote about this in a recent newsletter. It's going to come out Thursday, and it was about AI, but really about like this concept of like being like more articulate with like how you're, what vision you have for like what you want to create, and like decomposing it into the subcomponent parts and really thinking through like what makes a great thing, whether it's a blog post, a LinkedIn post, et cetera. And there was this moment in the essay where I said like, you may be pondering at this point, like, have I used AI to write this or any of my newsletters? And I said, I'll never tell, right? Like, because the core fact is that it should be invisible. And if it's not invisible, I'm doing it wrong. And actually, it's like every technique that you use should be invisible. Like I actually, so this is my pet peeve. I don't like it when I see the technique. I don't like it when you show me what you're doing either explicitly or implicitly. Because I see on LinkedIn sometimes, I see the template you're using. I see the framework. I see the best practice. I know who gave that advice. Like I get it in sales calls. Like I'm like, I see what you're doing, and I hate when I see the strings that are being pulled. I want a little bit more magic in marketing, whether that's in SEO, whether that's in LinkedIn, like wherever that like touch point is. I want there to be a little bit more voodoo, a little bit more like behind the scenes, a little bit more curtain, like I don't want to see all the techniques. I don't want to know if you used AI to create this. I don't want to know if you didn't. I actually don't care. Like I just want the Picasso. I just want the painting.
I just want to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't care.
That reminds me of a thought I had like a few months ago about thinking like if I read an article on a company blog, the only way I want to be able to figure out what keyword you're targeting is in the URL. Like I don't want it to be like explicit. I mean, I'm sure now that we know how the sausage is made, we can probably pull it out, but it shouldn't be an obvious keyword play.
I will say the better you get at it, like if you were to use the artist analogy, like if you were a fellow artist, you would be able to tell like,
right.
I'm so out of my depth in this analogy, but like what techniques Picasso was using, and like, if he like was going through a surrealist phase or like, he was inspired by this person. So you're going to see more of that. But I still think like there's levels to this game, and sometimes artists can like fool other artists, I'm just deeply inspired by that movie, The Prestige, basically, because Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman like were in this like battle together, and like they were the best magicians, in their generation. And there was this one trick that like he just could not figure out how he did it, and like he was like spying on him and like all this stuff. And I loved that idea that he was so obsessed, and like they were the best in their craft, but there was still this level where it was like, you don't even know how I'm doing this,
Yeah. I find it difficult sometimes for that, and maybe this is by nature of how my brain works or being a marketer. And I want to tie this to one of the other questions we had, which is like, when did you fall in love with marketing? Which is when I read the book, Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday. For one reason is that I felt like I saw the Matrix and I see the games being played around me and see all the systems and incentives and things going on and how businesses work. But on the other hand, that also made me see the techniques and have more trouble enjoying the magic sometimes. And there are times where I'm like, I have to allow myself, like, I know what techniques being used, but also this is just so damn good. Yeah, continue. Like, I get it. I'm enjoying this. And it happens mostly in like consumer, because I'm just like, I actually am really enjoying and I feel the need to dissect what they're doing and all of that. But also sometimes it's just so magical that I'm just like, I don't care. I'm going to buy this thing, even though I know what they're doing.
That's a really good paradigm. I think like but to suspend disbelief, to understand like what their purpose is at least, and like some of the techniques, but like just for a second, like let yourself experience it. I think like I see some blog content like that. Like I think Josh Spilker at AirOps is doing some really interesting stuff on their blog, and I kind of know what he's doing, but then like, you know, he's weaving in like interesting quotes and like new frameworks and whatnot. And I read it trying to enjoy it without trying to dissect it as another marketer. You know, sometimes I think like, you know, like comedians probably like they know exactly what they're all doing. Yeah. But like I would imagine that it's kind of nice to just sit in the back of the room and enjoy like a show. Yeah.
I mean, when we were first doing an agency, I was running sales. I was selling to a CRO. And at the end of the call, he was like, "You ran a great discovery call, man." I'm like, great, way to be super meta about this, man. But then when I'm on sales calls now, like we just spoke to Nicole at AirOps, great salesperson. I knew what she was doing, gathering all the information in discovery call and everything. And I was just like, you know what? I'm actually enjoying this conversation because the questions are just so damn good. She clearly did her research. She understands our pain points and everything. I'm like, yep, I'm just going to pour out all the challenges and pain points and like tell her exactly what's happening because she knows her shit. And that's just like, I think a core part of this type of experience that I would imagine you as a marketer want to provide others. Like, even if they are aware, it should be something where they feel seen and heard.
Yeah. And I think it should feel effortless. Like, I think that was more the point that I was making is like, I don't think like in her sales pitch, she felt like she was straining or like the techniques were so obvious and apparent that they were like forced. I think like there was this level of, even if you could see kind of like what she was doing, like it was a little bit abstracted behind the experience itself. You know, I think I'm more like, it's when it's obvious, like when it's crude, like I want it to be a little bit more subtle. There's this idea of sprezzatura, which is like this, I believe, Italian concept. It's like even if like it's a lot of hard work, like I don't like sharing a lot of techniques that I use. Like I don't like sharing a lot of like how I do podcasts. I like to, even if, oh man, I'm maybe giving secrets, but I spend more time than I let on, and I care way more than I let on in prepping for podcasts. But I don't ever want it to seem like that. And I do this in all areas of my life. You know, it's like in friendships and romance and like business, there's something really fun about something feeling effortless, you know? And it's like when the other person feels like they're forcing like a technique or a framework that they just read about in a sales book, you're just like, come on, just try. Like you're tense, you know. You're like, just let it go. Like don't tell me about the 40 hours you spent on this. Like just give me the show, you know. When did you fall in love with marketing?
Probably my mom's business. I was helping her with it from the age of like 10 or 11. I didn't really realize what like marketing was marketing. It's a pretty analog business. I went to school for marketing and I didn't learn a lick of it. I think the value that came out of that was the connections I have and then the small business I started when I graduated. So I really got to put a lot of what I learned into practice and kind of DIY my way through that. And that was really fun for me. I really got to try a lot of different channels. And to me, marketing was really creative at the time. I did a lot of my own design, a lot of my own ads, a lot of like the, what's it called? Collateral that went with my business. And then writing. You know, when I started writing and working with some clients, I was like, oh, I can all I wanted to do was write. And then I realized like all I know about is business. So I wanted to write what I knew about. And then it just kind of took shape over time. And I think when I got to HubSpot is when I really started to connect all the dots I learned and understand how to make money through what I was doing. So I think a couple different touch points for me.
But there's a little bit of a story that you skipped over, which is how you fell in love with the writing, because that seems like a through line that connected you to the business purpose.
I always liked to write. When I was younger, I wrote like little short stories, and in college now, which I'm a little bit sad that like college students don't have to do the same kind of writing that we did. I think there's...
What do you mean?
With AI. I mean, there's really no telling. Some people might...
Yo, I would be just ChatGPTing so much.
I mean, why wouldn't you? Like, it's right there. Yeah. And, you know, that's just a good way to get your work done. But I think college writing, essay writing is a whole different beast. But I really liked it. I loved like connecting dots, doing analysis through writing. And then when I started freelancing, you get into that flow state. You're like, oh my God, look at the story, look at this. I'm connecting all these points. And when I started working with my coach way back then, I was like, I want to get better. I want to figure out how to do this for money. She was like, well, what do you know the most about? And it was like business. Like I've run multiple businesses, not at the degree of who we work with now, but enough to know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So it kind of became this meta, like writing about business and then about writing. And then it just led to HubSpot, but I'd always loved it.
Me too. It's a strange thing to love because it is a painful activity.
And when you stop doing it as much, it's harder to pick it back up, which is where I'm at.
Yeah, I learned as I got older, you know that feeling of when you're writing something and you're trying to find a right word or phrase, and maybe it takes a couple minutes or a couple hours, or you have to go Google some synonyms or something. You're like, but once you get it, you're like, oh, yes, like this is exactly what I'm trying to communicate. I realize that not everyone has that, and not everyone likes to write. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know that feeling? Like, how do you communicate?
Yeah.
And I think writing there's this value of being able to structure your thoughts and what exactly you want to say that, I don't know, I didn't think about how college students are like writing with AI and how they might be skipping over building that muscle.
Well, writing is
that
thinking,
makes me sad. Yeah.
Right? And like, if you're not thinking through it, I remember as a really young kid, like maybe middle school, I had a really tough class. I think it was like history. I just never really like connected with history. And you had to write those like book reports or these reports. And I was like copying and like pasting Wikipedia and just changing every word. And like, that's where my love of writing stopped. And my dad was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like you might have this piece that's technically accurate, but you can't tell it like in a different way. And I think that's what's happening. And even I find myself doing that with AI is like, what is that? I don't know if I conceptually can connect to this if I'm using something to assist me. But do you all remember that post that was going around? I think it was like Tumblr or something about like the rhythm of writing and like how every like sentence and stanza has like a different like beat to it. Like that's what I love is when I'm reading and I'm like, oh my God, that was so good. Like I read it out loud and more so to fiction, I think it applies. But
do you like F. Scott Fitzgerald? I always felt like I was reading jazz when I was reading his writing.
Yeah. That was that and what you said and that were my favorite parts of writing. But yeah, I think that's where my love of marketing came from. What about
that's yours?
I had two, because when this question was asked at a meetup, and like my initial curmudgeonly answer was like, I never fell in love with marketing, you know? But that's not true. It's like marketing is this very broad thing, and what I fell in love with was the scrappiness and the creativity of it. So there were two different experiences. One was less about marketing and more about business. And I had always been scheming as a kid and doing like lemonade stands and stuff like that. But there was a particular experience, I think around 4th or 5th grade, when I discovered this website called cafepress.com. And you could like make designs on t-shirts and on mugs and on all kinds of different apparel. And I found like jokes and like puns and stuff like that on the internet. And I would put them on t-shirts just for fun. And I remember like a couple months in, I got a check in the mail. My dad saw it first and was like, what? This looks like a check and it's written for Alex. You know? And and it was like a $30 check or something like that. And I got a couple more after that. And I was like, whoa, you can make money online with just like creative like convergence, you know?
Yeah.
That was a cool experience for me. That unlocked a lot. But the marketing one, it was when I was in high school, which was in a small town in Wisconsin. And I was in like a punk rock band. And we were like 15, so like there was nowhere to play. You know, anywhere that we could play was like a bar, and we couldn't like play because we were 15 years old. And we also didn't have any like awareness, and nobody like respected us as a band because we were just starting out. So what we found is we could rent the city hall in our small town for like a pretty nominal cost. Like it wasn't too expensive. So we did that. And then we found a couple other bands that we were friends with in the nearby town of Dubuque, Iowa. And we were really excited about this show. We had like 3 or 4 bands. Like we borrowed the PA system, or we were going to borrow the PA system from our band teacher. He had let us use it, which was amazing. You know, we had a set list all designed up. And then we printed a bunch of posters marketing the show to our fellow classmates in high school. And we put them up around the school. And like within 2 hours, the principal had taken them down, which was really disheartening for us. Like we were like, this is our, you know, we're excited, but how do we get the word out here? And just the verbal or the marketing jujitsu that went on in my brain right there this was the moment where I became like a scrappy marketer. What's the one thing about high school students? It's like they're rebellious, right? Like they want to stick it to the man, fuck the principal. Like he just gave us this golden ticket and we weren't going to waste that.
Took that personally.
So what we did was we went out and bought a bunch of like white Hanes t-shirts, like super cheap ones, and a bunch of markers. And we told like all like the football team, like everybody who was popular, we're like, yeah, he like took down the posters, like can't believe this, blah, blah, you know, like we really fired people up, and we're like, we're going to make shirts just to like, stick it to them. And we had like, I don't know, a couple dozen people just walking around in these like band t-shirts, like, show at 7 p.m. Friday. And there was nothing he can't tell you to take off a t-shirt. So we just had these walking advertisements with the most popular kids at our school.
That's amazing.
Who were doing it. I mean, because they liked us, as friends, but like also just because they wanted to be a little asshole and make the principal mad, because that was like the message that we were like, it's going to make him mad if you do this.
So punk rock.
How was the show? Who showed up?
It was great. Everybody showed up.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
That's so funny.
So that was the first moment. And I still love that style of marketing. I still love like the scrappy, resource constrained, tap into something like grassroots kind of community. Like
pretty sure that's how North
the stuff
Face
that I
grew.
like the most. What do you mean?
They just gave all their jackets to college kids way back when. I don't think it was Patagonia. I think it was North Face. Because I remember reading about this case study maybe in college or after college, and they didn't run any ads. They just gave it to a bunch of like cool people, and it went from there.
Even if you do have budget, I think a lot of the most interesting and effective ideas come from that type of thinking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's like your ad dollars are sort of an accelerator of the creative or the strategy behind it. And that's what I've always believed about even, SEO and SEO content. When you hear like all the time, like the banality and the boringness of it, and like it's just SEO content. So like, let's just plug and play like a AI workflow or something like that. It's like, it's all that's doing is just like spreading like a thin message thinner, and it's like, if there is something behind it, it's this amazing distribution channel, just like meta ads, just like anything else. And it's like, what is that core idea? What is that like movement that you're tapping into? That's like the underrated piece. That's actually very complicated and hard to figure out, but it's like the most fun.
Yeah. I didn't have like the business gene that early on. Like I sometimes wish I had a story for that. I didn't have it until like college, where it was like finals. Like it wasn't when I fell in love with marketing, but when I realized I was doing it unintentionally. Like during college, during final season, everyone hunkers down in like the student center or whatever studying. There was one quarter where my friend was like delivering coffee to people, like just for the hell of it. She was like, yeah, just pay for it. I'll like deliver because I don't have any finals. And then the next quarter, I was like, hey, Cora, can I take over that? Are you going to do that this quarter? And she said, no. I'm like, cool, I'm going to do it. And then I created a Facebook event when that was still a thing. And I don't know what drove me to do this, but I was like, I'm in a dance community. There are people in a dance community who are very popular, and I'm going to invite all of them. And people are going to see that they're attending this pop-up coffee shop thing. And then more people are going to see it, and they're going to share it, etc. I went to, I guess it's like business, marketing, operations, or whatever. I went to Smart & Final, like this wholesale place, just bought like bunch of styrofoam cups, paper cups, the lids, coffee in bulk, and like set up shop in my college apartment and like saw orders coming through. I'm like, oh shit, okay, I got to go make all this coffee and deliver it to people.
Oh my God.
I'm like, oh, what if I wrote like personal mess, like good luck with finals and stuff on the cup? And then people like took pictures and shared it. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm like, I need help though. And then I started recruiting friends like, hey, do you still have finals? Do you want to help with this thing?
God, that's
and then,
cool.
I don't know. I don't think we really profited because we spent so much money. But like the next quarter, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this again. So I think we had like 4 different cars doing deliveries at any given time. We had like assemblies and like assembly lines in my apartment. And we were trying to figure out unique ways to like get more people ordering stuff. Like, oh, we'll do a discount if you order like 4 drinks for your group of people doing like studying and stuff. But that was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, is this business? Like, this is marketing. Like, that was so easy. Because you were a biology
major, right?
I was a chemistry major.
Chemistry major.
I like that story because you prefaced it by saying, oh, I don't have the business gene. And then you proceed to talk about like multiple ways that you exemplified the business gene in like the most like
fundamental ways.
It was, it was one of those things where maybe that was like the first moment for me of, I'm just going to go do this thing and not overthink it. And it just seems fun. And it turned into this thing that became more systematic, but I don't know, maybe that was my like waking up moment of, oh wait, I can just go do shit. Like I don't need to look up how to do this. I'm just going to figure it out.
That was the moment that you developed high agency, as is popular to say nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, oh man, that's why I think I bristled at it, at the question at first, is because like I never associated myself strongly with marketing per se, because I had worked in experimentation, managed a team of PMs, right? Like, and there's been multiple domains that I've looked at over my career. And I've always looked at it as like problem solving, particularly if you can put a flare of creativity on the problem solving. And you're just looking for like impactful business problems to solve. And those, you know, you can be a problem solver outside of business too. But like that to me is like the crux of it. And that's what people overlook. Like, I think like a lot of the conversation is so surface level and tactical. And that's why I've never been super interested in that layer of conversation, including to the level that we called our podcast The Long Game and like deliberately tried to find these underlying mental models and frameworks and experiences, the actual thinking process that led to the tactics, right? As opposed to just saying like, I did X, Y, and Z. And this was the result, right? Because then people will copy that and not understand that it was actually this really interesting like insight that you found and like this interesting wedge. And like, you know, I found my way to like, you know, figure this thing out. Somehow I figured that out. And that's usually where like the real juice is.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because when people just see the tactics, usually the person that was doing it in the first place were like, I didn't have this planned out. It actually didn't work the first time I tried it.
Every best practice and framework started as an experiment. Or just like you said, just like, oh, this sounds like a good idea. I don't know if it's going to work. Very few people, I think, take that space. They just go straight to Google, go straight to ChatGPT, best practice for X, framework for this. And in some way, like you said, Pep's posts, like, I learned this lesson, I'm going to help you not have to learn it yourself. Like there's some good to that of like helping folks learn faster, but there's a lot more learning that happens when you just like fuck up along the way. And I think some people, young people in their careers, marketers who just want to drive activation rates, they get so focused on like the tactics and like doing their job, they're missing the forest for the trees. I think until you operate a business on whatever scale and see like the end to end, I don't know, maybe it's not that hard and fast, but I just think there's something to be said about really focusing on like, this is my job, my number, my tactic, and not thinking bigger picture.
Well, you can, I think like a lot of the thought processes that go on in your brain are really invisible. So like there's probably some level of like information synthesis and like convergent thinking that occurs when you've like read Trust Me, I'm Lying, and maybe like a bunch of Pep's LinkedIn posts and whatever. Like maybe you're not even conscious of what's happening in that like stew in your brain where like that insight comes about. So I still think it's valuable, but then ultimately at the end of the day, you have to like A, think for yourself, critical thinking, and then B, like even if like you have a brilliant idea, it doesn't mean it's going to work. Like I've had a lot of brilliant ideas that didn't work at all. And maybe that means they weren't brilliant, but I thought they were brilliant. Like logically they made sense. And then I tried it and it was like, well, that was a dud. And then other times I'm just like flying by the seat of my pants and I'm like, I'm not going to tell anybody that was not planned. Worked out really well for me. But yeah, I think like that's why I'm more excited about like the AI stuff than I think a lot of people, because I think accessibility is important. Like the more access you give to information, I think the better. I don't think there's any like real downside in that, particularly because I believe that like when Starbucks came out, it didn't kill the desire for craft coffee. Actually, it made that demand actually occur, because this is my understanding. I haven't read like a business case study on this, but like previously it was like Folgers and like in-house, like you just cook, you know, like make a pot of coffee yourself. And then Starbucks, like when it came at the time, it was like this premium version. You go out, it was this third place, right? And that awoke this desire for more craft local type experiences. And I think that could happen with like the value of information, in the sense that like if we can easily access information through deep research or something like that, that's like this convergence of many sources that are out there. It gives you like a boilerplate understanding of something, and then allows you to go fish out like maybe very unique sources and different data pools. So yeah, I still think it's very valuable to do that. But at the end of the day, like no one's going to save you. Like no one's going to come do it for you. And like we've looked at deep research, and I've done a lot of like prompting, and like people talk about like AI as a sparring partner. It's like kind of, it's like it's best case is that you were forced to kind of articulate what your problem was and like think through it, just like journaling does. It's like, oh, those are my thoughts, right? And like it gets you to this point where you're like, okay, well, now I got to think for myself and like actually get into the weeds and like do the thing myself, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't found it to be a great sparring partner, but it'll provide a starting point. Like if I'm trying to think through a challenge, like if it's a business challenge, I might be like, help me think about these things. What questions should I ask myself? Sometimes it gives the most generic, useless stuff. I'm like, okay, well, this isn't very helpful. I need to go think for myself now. I don't know what people are. My hunch is it, in the same way that it brings the quality of content that's created to a medium, I think it also it brings the level of critical thinking to a certain medium. Like if people weren't already asking themselves these questions that may seem basic to some people, it at least brings them up to that level where they're like, oh, now I know that I should be asking these questions.
Which is great, right? Like if you were a marketing leader looking to build out like an ABM motion, like to get that level, it's almost like sending like a entry-level employee to do a bunch of research for a week or two, and you can get that back within like a couple minutes. And that's like an amazing value add. So I don't want to discount that, but totally. One more question, then I think we're almost at time. But what underhyped marketing activity do you think is due for a renaissance?
I think you have the strongest opinion here.
Well, the one that I thought was obvious, there's an obvious one and a non-obvious one. The obvious one is that we made a print magazine. So
wish we had it.
I know.
Actually, I do have a copy, but I'm not gonna take it out of my backpack. There's like the idea that you zig when others zag, and everything that we're talking about is digital in nature, and like there's just a reduction of friction in accessing that information. And there's something that happens which is like the opposite becomes, at least for a short time, more valuable. And I even think that's true of probably direct mail and any print assets. I'm not just saying like a creative magazine. There could be like a ton of different iterations or ways that you tactically do that. But I think that's something that I personally enjoy. And we can talk about like why we went into the magazine and all that. But I think blogging, like capital B blogging, like not like
a personal blog.
Oh, personal blog. I mean, you could have a company blog, like wherever it's housed. But like this old school thing that we used to just write like our thoughts, like it was like a live like journal entry, like a just like here's something that happened. Here's something that I'm thinking about. Like VCs used to be amazing at this. I think some of them still write. I used to follow all of them. I used to follow Ryan Holiday's blog. I still do. I mean, he writes a lot more about stoicism now. I used to love his in the weed stuff when he was working at like American Apparel. It was just like raw, unfiltered, sometimes amoral. Like he would just talk about crazy shit that was happening. Tim Ferriss's old blog, like that style, that's what I'm talking about, where it was really derived from like your personal experience. It was less edited. Like it wasn't really, there wasn't as much polish on it. Like it wasn't formatted for any sort of distribution channel.
Yeah, it wasn't like SEO-ified.
Right. Right. And I would love to see that come back, actually. And I think it might. like, I don't know if it's going to be the exact same version, but I think we see it a little bit in how newsletters are done.
Yeah,
like a lot of
Substack.
newsletters link to each other. Substack is actually a great example of that.
Medium, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's much anymore.
It's still, the only problem is like we still have the distribution problem, which in large part, like these blogs were successful because they had these internal linking mechanisms, or not internal linking, but they would link to each other. And that was like a common best practice. And there was comment sections. So you'd have like almost a community aspect to your blog, which we had on CXL. And then social was a really great place to distribute your content because people would post things on Facebook, and they would get like a ton of traffic from places like that. And I don't think any place like that exists anymore. At least to the level that it used to in 2014 or 2015. But I would love, like, that was, I don't know if it's just because I'm like nostalgic for it, but I thought that was a great era in content and information.
I do think there are signals that is what people will seek, even on LinkedIn. Like, I don't think people talk about the companies they follow on LinkedIn or the thought leadership posts they see from companies. They talk about the specific people they follow, or this useful post from this person that keeps popping up on their LinkedIn feed that they haven't unfollowed because presumably they're getting something helpful from it. And perhaps folks are going to start getting tired of the short form / algorithmically formulated content on LinkedIn and want to go for more of the long form type of stuff, which I would personally just also want to. Like, I want to know how people are thinking about these things. And the email newsletters I subscribe to are coming from individuals. Like, I care about what you have to say on these topics. And so that's why every Tuesday I open your email and I spend 30 minutes reading it and click every single link that you think is worthy of sharing, because clearly you have a filter for noise and like you can find the signal.
Yeah. I guess we are seeing it with Substack, because I read like Ronnie Higgins. He writes, I believe, on Substack, and Benjamin, right? He writes a Substack.
Diamond Pencils.
And those are blogs. Like those are like, I mean, because Substack, you also get like the link that you can view without, subscribing.
Yeah.
So I think in some sense that is maybe the current replacement for it.
Yeah.
And then even on LinkedIn, some of my favorite people to follow who are the most successful, Chad from Gable, if you look at his LinkedIn posts, they're kind of blog posts. He's got an image, they're long, they're technical, there's a big comment section, and he's engaging with the comments. It's like maybe half or a third of the length of like maybe an old school blog post, but that's fine. It's still kind of a blog post, isn't it?
I don't know if this is underhyped. For me, I think I was super into it and then I got really annoyed, and I'm kind of moving back toward email newsletters. I think it's a lot easier to curate what you're seeing and you're consuming more so than social media, because on LinkedIn, you want to be connected with the people you feel like that matter. You want to have that kind of like give and take. But when I go on my feed, I'm like, I don't care about a lot of this. It's probably just the phenomenon of what's happening recently, signal versus noise, like we've been talking about this entire time. But I take a lot of care with my inbox, and everybody that I subscribe to, I read, and I'm in there every day because of work. And so I feel like if they're really, really well done, preferably written by an individual who I can trust over time, I think that is something that SaaS companies should revisit. It's something like, it's gold. You have to mine it. You have to take the time to build it in a thoughtful way. It can't just be regurgitated content from elsewhere, maybe written by your CEO or your CMO or somebody that has that innate knowledge of the product and the industry. I also think it might be an interesting play with this whole MQL conversation, because to me, those MQLs are just about like you nurture those folks, right? It's not, they shouldn't go right to the pipeline. I've never believed that. I've never believed they should go straight to a salesperson. And it really doesn't surprise me that sales is annoyed by marketing if that's what they're getting from marketers. But that's another way of nurturing for playing the long game with those folks. So I think email, which is weird for me to say because last year I would have not said this, but it's a different take on the blogging, right? Mm-hmm. Just a distribution.
Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I do. I think that direct mail and print has actually always been alive. It's just not utilized very much. Mm. And I agree that I think there's going to be a resurgence. I don't think anyone I've spoken to about the magazine has said, I hate print. And everyone has said, oh, I love having a magazine and reading it with my coffee. And I want to do a magazine as well. And so there's this commonly said thing that perhaps due to us being in digital marketing, people don't talk about it as much. But if you're talking to them about it and bring it up, they'll actually say they really enjoy print. It's just a matter of maybe it harkens back to how a lot of B2B marketers feel like that's a risky thing to do. And maybe it is, but perhaps when everyone's digital and zigging, doing a magazine and zagging is exactly the thing you should be doing to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you saw this firsthand where you hosted a meetup and you were giving away the magazines and people were looking up Omniscient.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even talk about Omniscient in the magazine, really. I think it's on like the last page or something.
It's more of a showcase of the guests that we've had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was the data point from the meetup, which I brought 2 magazines for people who had been podcast guests. And I got a text from one of them the next day that was like, by the way, like everybody was super interested in those. And I saw multiple people pull their phones out and, search Omniscient. And then there was the other case, which was, I think it was on a sales call that I was feeling a little wily that day. I didn't follow my traditional script, right? And I just went off the rails and started talking about the magazine. And I was like, look, I'm going to throw a crazy idea out here. I don't think you should do this right now, but we just did a print magazine. And I showed the magazine and I remember her eyes lit up and she's like, I love print. Like she was so excited.
Yeah.
And I'm not nothing against SEO, but I've never heard that reaction. And I was like, that's certainly a higher emotional reaction than we've heard before.
Yeah. Yeah. No one says, oh, I love going on his company's website and reading their content.
I love Google.
I love everything existing online.
Oh, that's great. Should we go get dinner or something? All right. That's good.
The end.
Look at that.